Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Nerdy Multiverse in yet another video. After an 8-week span and 8 episodes, the third season of House of the Dragon has come to a close. A season where we saw the show adapt iconic events from the source material, such as the Battle of the Gullet, the Battle of Butcher's Ball, and the first Battle of Tumbleton. The third season also brought a great amount of loss of some of the most prominent characters, such as Jacaerys, Otto, Kristen, Ormond, and Helena. And with the fourth season, the story will end, as it has been confirmed as the final season of the show. So that begs the question, what will we see adapted and what will happen in the fourth and final season of House of the Dragon? Obviously, with these different adaptations, and with this show specifically, these things are subject to change in some way or not be adapted at all. But in order to predict or theorize on what will happen in the final season, we have to dive into the source material itself. And with that, this video will of course contain major spoilers from the book and for events that are highly likely to happen in the show in some form. So this is your spoiler warning now, you have been warned. Now, with the third season ending with the betrayal of Ulf the White and the first Battle of Tumbleton, we will likely see the fourth season focus on the aftermath of the battle and then lead into the Caltrops and then the second Battle of Tumbleton in the very early episodes. In the source material, the Caltrops were a group made up of 13 different lords and knights from the Reach that had plotted to kill the two betrayers, being Ulf the White and Hugh the Hammer, as they had grown increasingly more difficult to work with, as Ulf was demanding to be given Highgarden as a reward, while Hugh had his own ambitions of claiming the Iron Throne for himself after falsely believing a prophecy was about him. However, the day that they had planned to kill the two dragon seeds was interrupted by a surprise attack from Adam on the back of Seasmoke and 4,000 rivermen, bringing forth the second Battle of Tumbleton. Ulf would sleep through the entirety of the battle, but Hugh would rush to the stables so that he could get to Vermithor. However, he would be interrupted by one of the Caltrops, being Jon Roxton, who would offer him his condolences before cutting Hugh directly in half. Roxton would then face off with over a dozen of Hugh's own loyalists and then be killed after slipping in Hugh's own entrails. Now, obviously in the show, Hugh has not betrayed Rhaenyra yet, and was not a part of the whole betrayal plot that happens during the first Battle of Tumbleton in the show either. But after finding his wife Cat dead, I do believe he will switch sides, in turn leading into his role during these events. All of the Green's dragons during the second Tumbleton would be riderless, including Targaryen, as Daemon was also said to be killed before the battle even began, although it is unknown as to exactly how he was killed. So honestly, at the very beginning of season 4, they could even reveal that Daemon was killed during the finale. However, the lack of dragon riders during the second Tumbleton did not bring a lack of dragon action, as the Rivermen would attempt to kill both a sleeping Silverwing and Vermithor, only to fail. This attack would enrage Vermithor, who would then begin fighting indiscriminately in the skies. All while this was happening, Adam on Seasmoke was seen engaging with the riderless Targaryen, although their dragon's fight was described as more of a mating dance than anything. So I really do hope they adapt that detail in the show. However, after seeing Vermithor's rampage, Adam would redirect Seasmoke in his direction, and Targaryen would follow, leading into a massive dragon battle. During the battle, Adam would unfortunately be killed, and Seasmoke would then be slain shortly after by Vermithor. Afterwards though, Vermithor would succumb to his own wounds in the fields, and Targaryen would also suffer injuries of her own, causing her to fail to take flight, which led into her being put down by a Blackwood archer. The battle would end at dusk, and even though it's absolute devastation, it would serve as a victory for Team Black. Silverwing would be the only dragon to survive this battle, and after returning to Vermithor's body and trying to comfort him one last time, she would fly off and live the rest of her days as a wild and free dragon, after a few failed attempts to tame her had occurred. After the Second Tumbleton, the remaining caltrops would also successfully poison and kill Ulf the White in his chambers. Now, technically, the Second Tumbleton doesn't happen until a few weeks after the first one in the source material. However, I do see the show sort of combining the two, having one part in the season finale of season 3 and having the other part in the season premiere of season 4. Now, an event that actually takes place before the Second Tumbleton in the book is the Battle Above the God's Eye. However, I think that they will adapt this after in the show and likely around the mid-season mark. This is a battle that has been hinted at and foreshadowed ever since the very first season of the show, as the tension between Daemon and Aemond has always been present, and both characters have had their Harrenhal visions and statements of dying in the God's Eye. Despite being a battle fought without large armies, it served as one of the most legendary battles during the dance, as Daemon on Caraxes fought against Aemond on Vhagar. The small folk even feared that the sky was aflame due to the dragon's fire. The duel would be a sight to see, to say the least, as Caraxes tightened his jaw around Vhagar's neck and the dragons practically tore each other apart in the sky. It was then said that Daemon jumped from the back of his dragon with Dark Sister in hand and then drove his blade directly into Aemon's empty eye socket, killing him and then falling from Dragonback, as the two legendary creatures then crashed into the God's Eye Lake below. Caraxes would survive just long enough after the battle to crawl to shore, where he then would succumb to his wounds. Vhagar's body would be found years later, with Aemond still attached to her saddle, with Dark Sister sitting in his skull. The blade and the dragon skull would be returned to be put on display in King's Landing. However, Daemon's body would never be found, and what truly happened to him in the aftermath has never been confirmed. Some believed that he survived and returned to his secret lover, Nettles, which obviously cannot happen in the series, as Nettles was cut and then mixed with the character of Rhaenyra, who is Daemon's daughter, while others believed that Daemon's body was simply just devoured by the fish. Either way though, the loss of two of the biggest fighters for their respective teams and their dragons left a devastating blow for both sides. Like I said before, I do see them adapting this somewhere around the mid-season mark, sort of how they did with Rook's Rest and Rhaenys's death, and Butcher's Ball with Criston Cole's death. But in order for this battle to happen, Aemond has to reunite with his dragon, which will likely happen in the earlier episodes, which is where he will separate from his brother, Aegon, and possibly return to Harrenhal to be with his betrothed, Alice Rivers, who will also likely be pregnant with his child, just as she was in the book. Afterwards, Aegon will then go to Dragonstone and secretly take it over. This is an event known as the Fall of Dragonstone in the book, where we may also see the return of the character of Alfred Broom, who Aegon will then convince to switch to his side. In the books though, Aegon's survival was completely unknown and kept a secret, so I am curious how they'll do the Dragonstone plot with the entire realm knowing that he has actually survived, if they even adapt the plot to begin with. Either way though, with the fall of Dragonstone in the book, Baela and Moondancer would also be caught in the conflict and be brought into battle with Aegon and Sunfire. Aegon would be once again mortally wounded in this battle, completely shattering both of his legs, and Baela would also be burnt in this battle, but she would survive. However, her dragon Moondancer would not. We could also see the battle between Sunfire and the wild dragon known as Grey Ghost happen before this, where Sunfire kills and then devours the dragon to regain some of his strength that was lost during Rook's Rest. Although I could also see them skipping over this, or maybe mixing this with the Moondancer fight somehow, but Ryan Condal did confirm that we will be seeing new dragons in the 4th and final season, making the appearance of the wild dragons, Grey Ghost, and Cannibal possible. However, he is more than likely referring to the dragons that are present during the storming of the Dragonpit. This is an event that occurs after a religious figure known as the Shepherd would preach to the small folk of King's Landing about the Targaryens and their wrongdoings, saying that the dragons were demons and Westeros could only be safe of a fate similar to Valyria if they cleansed the realm of dragons and Targaryens, eventually leading to them storming the Dragonpit. This is the event that truly set forth the disappearance and practical extinction of the dragons, as over 20,000 small folk stormed the Dragonpit and would butcher the dragons and anyone who got in their way inside. Multiple Kingsguard would be slain, and Rhaenyra's other son, Joffrey, would also be killed during the slaughter, along with 5 dragons, being Shrikos, Morgul, Tyraxes, Dreamfire, and Syrax, an event that Helena saw in her dreams in the 3rd season of the show. And this event is the reason that the Dragonpit is in complete ruin by the time of Game of Thrones. Now, with the mention of the Shepherd character, I have seen theories that the show will turn Mysaria into the Shepherd, which I wouldn't be surprised about, as they have been giving her a much bigger role than she has in the book. With the increasing riots and the storming of the Dragonpit bringing the death of multiple dragons, including her own as well as her own son, King's Landing was no longer safe for Rhaenyra. So her and a small escort, along with her son Aegon the Younger, who is currently in Pentos in the series, and her handmaiden Alinda Massey, would sneak out of the city and venture to Dragonstone for safety, as they would await for Cregan Stark and Jane Eyre's armies to arrive from the north. There would be a short period in King's Landing known as the Moon of the Three Kings. After Rhaenyra fled the capital, the throne was left vacant, and despite the event's name, this period actually lasted over a month. King's Landing would see 3 separate monarchs rise to power without a Targaryen present in the capital, and these would be the Shepherd, the man that orchestrated the storming of the Dragonpit, Tristan Truefire, the squire to a hedge knight known as Perkin the Flea, who crowned Tristan, claiming he was the natural son of Viserys, and lastly, Daemon Palehair, a bastard son of Aegon II. Boris Baratheon would bring order to the city, however, before Aegon's return. Sir Perkin would be imprisoned, Tristan and Daemon's mother would both be executed, and Daemon would be imprisoned, but later welcomed into Aegon's service as a cupbearer. And the Shepherd would have his tongue removed, leading into him and his followers to then be burnt alive upon Aegon's return. After Boros's arrival, Alicent ordered a marriage between Aegon and Boros's daughter, Cassandra, and Corlys eventually agreed to swear fealty to Aegon as well. But as we know, before this time, Rhaenyra had fled, and once she arrived to Dragonstone, it would be revealed that Alfred Broom had betrayed her, and her guards would be slain before before they could even realize. She would be separated from her son Aegon and brought in front of Aegon and his dragon, Sunfire. They'd have a short exchange, likely to be one of the first ever times that they would speak on screen in the show, and then Aegon would order Sunfire to burn Rhaenyra alive. He would do so, and then devour her. She accepted this and would not beg for her life. However, her son, Aegon the Younger, was forced to watch, and he would then be taken prisoner afterwards, while Alinda Massey was said to have gouged out her eyes after witnessing the queen's death. But even though Rhaenyra was killed, the dance was still not over. She still had those loyal to her and her cause, and it was only a matter of time. Sunfire would eventually succumb to his wounds while on Dragonstone, and then Aegon would return to King's Landing on board a ship known as Mouse. But due to his injuries, Aegon would be unable to climb up the steps to the Iron Throne, and instead held court from a wooden chair beneath the actual throne. All the while, the remaining loyal Rivermen were marching to King's Landing in the name of their now dead queen. This would lead into the final battle during the dance, known as the Battle of the King's Road, which I also wouldn't be surprised if we don't see fully adapted, or adapted faithfully. But anyways, this battle is between the Rivermen forces, which included the likes of Black Aly and Benji Cott Blackwood, against Boris Baratheon and his forces, that eventually were increased by houses Duskendale, Hayford, Rosby, and Stokeworth. Houses previously loyal to Rhaenyra, along with poorly armed levies from Fleabottom. The two armies would meet just 2 days away from King's Landing, where Boris would stand unafraid of forces that he described as just boys and women. However, despite his forces outnumbering the remaining forces of Rhaenyra's here, he would be outmaneuvered by boys and women, as Black Aly and her archers had positioned on the hill and would rain down and break Boris's cavalry charge, only to then be flanked by Bloody Ben. Houses Rosby, Stokeworth, and Hayford would refuse to fight upon seeing this, and the levies from Fleabottom would flee. Out of nowhere, the men from Duskendale would then suddenly flip again and begin attacking Boris's forces. Despite all of this chaos though, Boris did fight valiantly, and was able to take out a numerous amount of soldiers, including some known lords. However, he would be killed by a Morning Star used by Lord Kermit Tully after Boris refused to surrender. The battle would serve as a major victory for Team Black, even if Rhaenyra was gone, and they would then begin marching towards King's Landing. And it was only a matter of time before Team Green and Aegon then fell. And Corlys knew this, so he pleaded with Aegon to just surrender. But Aegon refused. After the meeting with his small council, Aegon would then be carried to the royal sept in his litter, where he would have a customary flagon of his favorite wine. But upon arrival, he would be found dead inside the litter, with blood on his lip, obviously poisoned by the wine. But who exactly poisoned Aegon remained unknown. Now, for all we know, they could just end the show right here. But in order to conclude the dance properly, you have to show who actually ends up on the throne in the end. And I could see them adapting the events following Aegon's fate in a sort of ending montage for the finale, as we would see Cregan Stark finally arriving to King's Landing with his armies, where he would govern the city for 6 days, an event known as the Hour of the Wolf. And during that time, he would execute multiple figures for treason, such as Larys Strong, who was strongly believed to be the one that poisoned Aegon. However, I have seen theories that they will actually have Alicent present for Rhaenyra's death, and then they will actually have Alicent be the one that poisons Aegon in the end, which again, I wouldn't be surprised with this show. But anyways, Rhaenyra and Daemon's son, Aegon the Third, or Aegon the Younger, would then become the next king, bringing forth the end of the Dance of the Dragons. I would like to and have always wanted to see what happens with Rhaenyra's other son, Viserys' story in Lys, and the Rhaegar family develop, and him returning to Westeros put on screen, but I highly doubt that will happen. Now, obviously, this is a timeline of events that purely take place in the book, and exactly how they happened, just not including every single small detail, of course. And I'm sure that they could go and change some of this or even skip over some of it, especially considering the show's track record of doing so. Even if the book is more of a retelling of histories rather than a fully fledged out story, and the dance era only took up a portion of the book. All I know is that the final season will be completely action-packed and filled with a whole lot of character deaths, if done correctly, of course. And it may be hard to fit all of this into a final season, which will also likely be just another 8 episodes, which is why I think this series has had a bit of a pacing issue in the past, as the final season will technically be adapting the most amount of pages from the book, if they adapt everything I talked about, as season 1 was 72 pages, season 2 was 29, season 3 was 32 pages, and if they go and adapt everything I mentioned, season 4 would then be adapting a total of 103 pages. Now, I've definitely had my issues with the changes and the writing at times, but I will continue to watch and cover the show regardless. I still do have hope that they will get things wrapped up properly, even with the mistakes that we have had in the past. I know it's a lot of information and a lot to happen in what will likely just be another 8 episodes, and I am sure that there will still be some more additional show original plots and such as well. But these are the main events that will likely happen or hopefully take place when basing it on the source material. Regardless though, I am still excited for the next and final season and can't wait to watch it. Same with the second season of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, albeit I will admit I am more excited for that. But yeah, that about does it with the predictions or explanation on what we will be seeing in the final season of House of the Dragon. If you have any theories or if I missed anything, make sure to leave your thoughts down below. Now, with the 3rd season done, I will likely start doing more lore videos based on some of the characters that we saw this season, and some of the events that happened and that were also cut, so keep an eye out for those in the near future. But with that being said, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like on it. And with that, we will see you the next time that we go through and explore the Nerdy Multiverse.